Welcome to our live stream with Plan to Protect and beEmboldened. My name is Natasha Fish. I'm the board chair of beEmboldened, and we have Melodie Bissell, Plan to Protect president, and Naomi Wright, beEmboldened founder and executive, joining us today. You'll get to hear more from them in a little bit, but I'm going to intro us to start off and just share that we're really excited that you're here and give you kind of a roadmap for what to expect. So Plan to Protect and beEmboldened are two wonderful organizations that are partnering in a really special way in collaborating to form a workshop that's a one-day workshop for church leaders and Christian ministries. And so you're going to get to hear about that workshop and why it's important, why we should care about this. This workshop is specifically on spiritual abuse for church leaders and their teams, and is all about equipping church leadership to protect their congregations as well as leadership's teams from spiritual abuse. So this workshop is going to equip people in the areas of healing and rebuilding, so that leadership understands better the struggles and needs of spiritual abuse survivors. And we're going to get into more details about what to expect, what teasers and things that you can be looking forward to with that. But make sure you stick around, because there's going to be a special announcement at the end of this live stream. And we also have a great discount code for you, and if you're interested in this workshop. So quick overview of the workshop. You are a church leader doing really important work, caring for the vulnerable, and you and your leadership team need to be protected, as well as protect your congregation from pitfalls that can be avoided. So this workshop is all about equipping churches and Christian ministry leaders who are concerned about spiritual abuse and the dangers of that, and wanting to protect their people and themselves. But first, let's define our term spiritual abuse. There are many variations on this term. So beEmboldened defines spiritual abuse as when someone with spiritual authority, whether positional or perception, uses their power and influence wrongly for their own agenda. It's a form of manipulation or exploitation that typically touches every aspect of someone's life and functioning because of its connection to a person's overall worldview. So through 8 modules offered on this workshop, your team is going to be equipped with educational information, case studies, understanding the outcomes of what spiritual abuse does, as well as actually developing policies and procedures for your specific organization to implement. So it gets super practical, and you actually walk away with something that you can implement. So you also get a certificate after completion to boost your credibility as an organization that cares for the vulnerable, which is a really great way to communicate that this matters and that you've taken practical steps to make a difference in this way. This workshop is going to be held in person or virtually, and is scheduled upon request, so it can really be flexible and meet the needs of your church and your ministry context, which is just a huge benefit. So with that, finally, we won't leave you hanging after the end of this workshop, because there's actually another follow-up to this experience. You'll get a 1-hour follow-up session within 6 weeks of the workshop to review that finalized version of the action plan and the policies and procedures that you created, so that you're really given great information, a practical tool to implement it, and some support in that. So we are going to do a sneak peek of some of the content shared through these 8 modules. Melodie and Naomi are going to talk about that. We're going to answer questions. We have a few of our top most asked questions, but please, we encourage you to add questions to the chat at any point, and we look forward to responding to your questions. So with that, we'll end by sharing a special announcement from beEmboldened, and also a 20% discount code that you can use if you check out to register between now and October 31st. All right, with that, I'm so excited to have Melodie and Naomi joining us today. And to kick us off, I'd love to just ask, how did this workshop come to be? Can you share with us, why are you partnering together for this workshop, and why are we sitting here today?
Melodie, do you want to jump into that first?
Sure. I'll start. It was actually Naomi that reached out to me and asked if we wanted to partner with beEmboldened on this. And I say we're a little bit like peanut butter and jam, or peanut butter and chocolate. I love the work that beEmboldened does. When I first heard about it, I said, yes, we need this. And I love the trauma-informed approach that beEmboldened takes. And Plan to Protect is an organization that strives for the highest standard of abuse prevention. And over the course of the 18 years that we have been in existence, we've been combating and addressing the topic of abuse, all forms of abuse. But in the midst of hearing about sexual abuse or physical abuse that happens within churches, emotional abuse, so often spiritual abuse goes hand in hand with that. And Naomi approached me because she has great content and great approach to the whole focus of spiritual abuse, but we've got some of the tools and the resources to actually help churches address this. So, example, when I hear about a whistleblower that is shunned and tried to be silenced because they raise concerns about abuse, not only could abuse be occurring, but now also spiritual abuse is happening. And so we want to make sure if churches have strong safeguarding policies on sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, neglect, but they also have strong policies and procedures and awareness of spiritual abuse and how prevalent that is within churches and ministries.
Absolutely. And when I started creating this workshop, we'll get through the 8 modules, but I had created 4 modules. And I just realized, wow, people really need help with actually creating the policies. So not every church has a whistleblower policy. Many churches don't know really what it would be for, like why would we need it or how would it be helpful? And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you really wish you had it after something happened. And so let's be proactive. And that's something I really respect about Melodie and the work that she's done and her team does with Plan to Protect is they're preventative. They are being proactive, and we're bringing that into this workshop now by having Melodie and her team present the other 4 modules. So people are walking away with a really good footing on actual policies and procedures that they're going to put into place. They're going to curate for their team. They're going to train their team. They'll be able to train new team members as they come in. And we can look at that for every level of leadership, because something we know about spiritual abuse is that the reason we have in our definition of whether it's positional, like someone is actually in a designated, they have a titled position where they have a place of authority or power influence over someone. Sometimes it's just perception. So we can perceive a mentor to have that kind of power and influence and authority. We can perceive a volunteer who's heading up other volunteers to have that authority, even though maybe their position would not completely give it to them in the way that we're perceiving it. And so it's really important for all levels, our small group leaders, people who are spending time with their children, of course. And so in all of these different ways and all these different positions, we are wanting people to be really informed on the issue and on what they can do to prevent, as well as inevitably people like myself who have experienced spiritual abuse will end up walking in church doors at some point again. Hopefully, I know I have, I know many others who have. And the church doesn't necessarily know how to help. They don't necessarily know how to come alongside when it hasn't happened in their building either. It's just, okay, it didn't happen in our building, but like, how do we come alongside this person? And so we want to make sure that the team is also equipped on that end of, hey, you are inevitably speaking to spiritual abuse survivors every week when you do your sermon. You're engaging with them. If you're a volunteer server, or if you're whatever it is, you're going to engage with people who have survived spiritual abuse. And so how do we do that well? How do we do that well if someone shares their story? And again, we'll get more into that as we give a little teaser about each of these 8 modules, but we're coming at this from more than one angle so that the team is really, really well equipped and they feel like they've got a good footing moving forward.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm loving seeing some interaction in the chat already, and we're going not according to our plan just at this moment, because I think it's really important to back up a little bit and go over our definition of spiritual abuse before we move into the modules, just to make sure that we're all starting from the same plane. And we have some questions people wondering what is spiritual abuse, and so maybe we can give some definition or some examples. I'm going to read the definition again. That I shared that beEmboldened uses as our definition, but Melodie and Naomi would love to hear some examples of how you would define or maybe exemplify spiritual abuse. So again, beEmboldened's definition, and we recognize there are some variations here, is spiritual abuse is when someone with spiritual authority, whether positional or perception, like Naomi talked about, uses their power and influence wrongly for their own agenda. It's a form of manipulation and exploitation that typically touches every aspect of someone's life and functioning because of its connection to a person's overall worldview. So Naomi and Melodie, if you would add anything to that definition, and then maybe provide some examples.
For our newest manual, we adopted the definition of beEmboldened because we really felt that it hit the nail right on the head. That manipulation, I think, is key. I love that word that's part of that definition, because it's difficult to always recognize what spiritual abuse is. People realize that it was spiritual abuse after the fact, and they don't immediately recognize it. But I think of the pastor that came into position as a senior pastor and demanded from day one that all of his staff be loyal to him. And on day one of his employment, he literally asked them each to sign a contract that they would be completely loyal to him, that they would never speak against him, and that they would follow everything that he said and be fully loyal. And I know when his staff heard this request, might have raised, it's like, what? That's crazy. But you don't always recognize that as spiritual abuse when someone's asking for that, blind loyalty, instead of being just loyal to Scripture or being loyal to the Lord, being loyal to just one person. So I think that manipulation is key in the definition of spiritual abuse.
Absolutely. And something that we share about spiritual abuse, and I'll mention this, this would be our topic actually for Module 1. So Module 1 that we cover for this workshop, the title of it is, What is Spiritual Abuse and Why is this so important? And so we really want to establish, okay, yes, what is it? What are examples of it? So we get further into what it is through this introduction. We use a case study as well as real life examples. So when I was creating this, I threw out on our social media, because our beEmboldened social media is spiritual abuse, because that is the exclusive area that we serve within. And so I was able to throw it out to our audience and say, what have you seen? Like, what would you say is like the top thing that you've experienced? And getting to see people's responses and getting to see the overlap in people's experiences, which we get to do on a day-to-day basis as well. And so bringing in some of those case studies, of course, maintaining confidentiality as it's so important, but being able to bring those to you to really wrap our heads around what is and what isn't. We also have some in there that are not, like, that would not constitute spiritual abuse, because sometimes it wouldn't fall into that category. It might fall into something else. So we'll define terms, we draw comparisons, we get to discuss prevalence, and we get to consider as well the long-term effects of spiritual abuse on followers of Jesus. So how does this affect them long term? Like we mentioned in the definition, it ties to overall worldview. If we're holding to a worldview of Christianity, for example, and that is the lens, so to speak, that we're looking through, and then we find out that that's been manipulated, well, oh my goodness, do I have to throw the glasses away? Can they be repaired? I mean, what am I doing? And it's affecting how I'm considering everything else in my life. And something else that I think is helpful to note, and it can be really important depending on someone's situation, is that spiritual abuse is commonly coupled with other forms of abuse. So whether it's verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, financial, neglect, whenever there's a spiritual element, whether the core abuse form is connected with someone's salvation, or it's simply that the abuser holds a place of a spiritual authority in the victim's life, spiritual abuse is also going to be present. And so whenever we're hearing about abuses in the church, spiritual abuse is present. It's automatically going to be there because it's happening within a spiritual context.
Excellent. Well, with that, let's dive in and get into the specifics about these modules. So Naomi, we're going to start off with you, as the first 4 modules really deal with spiritual abuse. And we'd love to hear just what do we need to know? What are the considerations about each of these modules, and what should people walk away with?
Sure. So I'll pick up then with module 2, because I know I just shared a little bit about module 1. And so module 2 is neat because it's actually a part 1 of a 2-part, and Melodie's team is going to handle part 2. So in part 1, we're getting you set up. And then, like I said, she'll come in later and fill you in more. But in this part 1 of part 2 topics, we're going to focus on areas of risk that leadership can consider. So, for example, at beEmboldened, we often hear stories about how difficult or even impossible it is to leave a church on good terms. That often is a sign of some sort of spiritual abuse, some kind of loyalty issue, some kind of like us versus them mentality. There's something going on there. And so we like to consider what we call an exit policy. So essentially, how can someone leave well? And how will church leadership respond to someone who is leaving? And are we being really upfront about this with our team? Because inevitably people come and people go, and how are people responding to people who come and people who go, particularly in this case with an exit policy, people who go? And it's not necessarily something that is kind of top of mind. It can be a cultural thing, but it can be a cultural thing that really benefits from being looked at, because we may find that there are some things that we should change, and maybe we need to adopt, which we advocate for, adopt an actual policy that is going in our manuals, is going in our trainings. And we're making sure that, again, those who are in positions of authority and influence, they know, okay, here's how we approach this. Here's how someone leaves well, and this is what this means, and it's possible. So that's an example from module 2. And then moving into module 3, our topic for this one is, how do we receive a report of spiritual abuse? So in this third module, we'll consider different ways in which we may become aware of someone in our congregation who's suffered spiritual abuse, whether that's within our walls, heaven forbid, or it's elsewhere. Like I said, someone like myself who is then coming into a church, a new one, but I'm bringing all of that history with me, and I haven't really been able to sort it through yet. And so I'm needing some support. So again, how do we, different ways we may become aware of someone in our midst who has had that kind of suffering in the past and is maybe currently suffering. And then we're going to talk about best practices for how to respond. Like, for example, how do we avoid defensiveness? Maybe for our own church, if we're being alerted that something happened within our own walls, like how do we avoid that defensiveness? But y'all, we so often actually hear the defensiveness even when it happens somewhere else, because we can maybe want to be a little like Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, while forgetting that, the brother or sister sharing with us is not actually the enemy, but we can want to be like, oh my goodness, like I need to protect the big C church. And so I feel defensive that these things are being said about God's people. And so I want to kind of like pick up arms and go to bat in some way. And so remembering that, no, this is a brother or sister who is treated wrongfully, and they're needing compassion, they're needing support. How do I actually come alongside them? And that's going to bring us into module 4, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about in module 4, is how do we come alongside someone in their healing and rebuilding process. So in this module, we want to cover common attributes of a spiritual abuse survivor. So what do we commonly see people struggling with? What can be even maybe some tells that someone has had an experience like this? We're going to talk about basic trauma-informed principles and best practices. And I don't want anyone to get nervous about this. Everyone cannot be experts in everything, right? We all know that saying. And so we're going to talk about how we companion well alongside someone. So we're talking about companioning. We're not trying to turn everyone into a support professional. Not everyone's going to be a counselor, right? We need to stay in our lanes and know our areas of expertise. And okay, how do we companion? How do we come alongside? Because we can also refer for things that we need to refer for. And we should do that. But we're going to talk about how we companion well alongside those who are suffering, so that we offer that much needed support, again, while also remaining within our areas of expertise. So we're going to give you a really good handle on how you can support someone well within, again, the paradigm that you're in, that lane that you're in. And from there, I hand it over to Melodie for the next half.
Thanks so much, Naomi. Those 4 modules really help us begin to lay that foundation of just a really sensitive, caring approach to combating spiritual abuse. So when I take over from Naomi, I go back as just a bit of a reminder of the importance of prevention for spiritual abuse. We're all about prevention and plan to protect. We want to prevent this from happening in the first place. So in Module 5, we answer the question, how do we prevent spiritual abuse within our congregation? So it's part 2, building on what Naomi has already taught. But in this module, we will speak to the values, the posture, the key principles of safeguarding that policies and procedures will be built on. We'll be answering some really key questions in this module. What are the key principles of safeguarding? What does a culture of goodness look like? How do we stay true to our theological beliefs and really reflect and role model integrity within our congregations? What role do trust and forgiveness have in addressing spiritual abuse and preventing any form of abuse from happening in the first place? So that finishes up those 2 parts of how to prevent spiritual abuse from happening. And then we move into the real practical bits of combating spiritual abuse. And in module 6, we answer the question, what are the components of a strong policy and procedure handbook? And I would even encourage you to look at your own policies and procedures now. And if you're not sure that you need this workshop within your organization, look at your policies and procedures, your protocols, and say, have we even addressed this topic of spiritual abuse? What is in our current policies and procedures to prevent this from happening and to respond to this? So in this module, we will actually look at what some of those components are, take that deeper dive, and we will be providing you a template. Everybody loves a template. I always say, why recreate the wheel? Well, we've got those templates that are part of our plan to protect protocols and all of our templates that we provide to our clients on combating any form of abuse. Well, we've got these templates for spiritual abuse, even including what Naomi mentioned earlier about the whistleblower policy. We've got those templates in place that are tried and true. So the template that we will provide will be a document that's provided to you in the course, and the template will include all the components that you will need for a strong policy and procedure handbook. We'll be including screening against spiritual abuse. We'll be talking about accountability measures. We'll also be looking at receiving that report and the process in receiving a report and responding appropriately when also look at issues of what are the key things to have in place when you face a crisis. You may encounter spiritual abuse within your churches or ministries, but it doesn't create a crisis. It might create a problem, but not yet a crisis. But what about when it does hit that crisis stage? So we'll be providing some real tangible tools for you in addressing when a crisis actually occurs within your churches that relate to spiritual abuse. And I agree with Naomi that if it happens, any form of abuse happens within the context of a church, there is a likelihood or the prevalence of spiritual abuse also happening. So how to respond to that really well. We'll provide sample templates and forms, including incident report form, code of conduct, confidentiality agreements, and a suspected abuse report form. So that'll all be included in that module number 6. Module number 7 is how do we handle a breach of policy? How do we handle the fallout when spiritual abuse has been reported or identified within the organization? So in this module, we are going to look steps to have in place, volunteer reviews, situations to make sure you you've had warning signs of it. Example, and again, workshop, we're going to be sharing case studies. And I can remember a story that could have been combated. It could have been addressed and avoided if there were good protocols in place. There was a long-term volunteer serving within a church. He had been doing a ministry for about 25 years. He and his wife, a new pastor came in, and that pastor, within a very short amount of time, literally fired him from this long-term ministry that he had been leading. And he and his wife really felt that they were victims of spiritual abuse. The way it was handled, the way he was discharged from the ministry, some of the comments that were used, the manipulation, the control that was used. And if there had been progressive steps of discipline, volunteer reviews, any warning signs could have been addressed well in advance. And then we move into the last module. And in this module, we're going to do a deeper dive into a case study that represents so often what we hear about spiritual abuse. All of the case studies that we use at Plan to Protect are true, real case studies. And I believe we can learn from other churches and ministries where there have been spiritual abuse that's been prevalent, whether it's been a form of other forms of abuse or not. But we're going to be really tackling the case study, digging deep into it, breaking it into small groups, discussing what we have learned in the course, how policies, procedures, and protocols could have addressed this, but even how to move forward once you discover that spiritual abuse has been in your, that has occurred within your churches. So that completes the 8 modules. And then, as Natasha said earlier, we're going to follow up with you after the 1-day workshop. And we're going to follow up with you whether 4 weeks, 6 weeks later to see how you're tracking with your policy template, your procedures, your handouts, your discussion after the workshop to make sure that you're well positioned to moving forward. Education is key. This workshop is all about education, but we don't want it just to be knowledge. We want it to be put into practice. So we're going to follow up with you 6 weeks later to see how you're tracking.
Wonderful. Oh, Naomi, you're muted.
Thank you. I had wanted to add, I love that piece of that follow-up because inevitably when we're talking about such big, important topics, there's a lot of processing that we're doing. And if anyone else out there who's a processor like me, where it's like, no, I need a little time. And then some questions will surface, or then I'll find out, gosh, I don't know if I fully get how to put legs to this or so you get that from us later where you can circle back and wrap up any loose ends that maybe you feel like you have after the fact. So yeah, I love that Melodie and I get to add that on to the end for you.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive into some questions now. We have a couple questions that kind of just give the gist and some logistics that are common questions. We want to answer those. And then we've also been getting some great questions in the chat. So we'll address as many of those as we can. And we encourage you to keep adding questions to the chat as we go along here. And we'll try to get to those. So first off, how long is this workshop? Can it be offered over 2 days?
Go ahead, Naomi.
So yes, Melodie and I feel good about the way this can be split because it may be best for your organization to just do 2 mornings, to do 2 afternoons, to do a whole Monday or a whole whatever it is. And so you have the option of either doing 4 modules, taking a lunch, doing the other 4 modules, or splitting the 4 and 4. So we would be less likely to split like my segment beEmboldened segment and Plan to Protect segment. We'd keep the 4 together because they build so nicely on one another. We want to keep that. So you have that build throughout your morning or your afternoon. We want to make sure that it doesn't get too choppy for you, and that could maybe take away from your experience. But yes, we could split the 4 modules and the other 4 modules. And so that, and depending on your team, again, that could work out way better for logistics. And maybe for your team too, maybe for processing and debriefing, maybe it's just better in that regard. So yes, we're happy to offer that. So that would give you 2 half days or a full day.
Great. What about when the workshop is happening? Can I take it whenever? Can my team, or does it happen at certain times of the year?
I'll answer this question because so many of the workshops that we have at Plan to Protect are for individuals. So, we've got a train the trainer course for individuals that will be trainers. We've got an administrator leader course for individuals that are going to be the administrator or leader of safeguarding within their church. But this workshop is really designed for teams. So we've priced it for a leadership team within a church or a ministry. So you schedule with us. So once you register for the course as a team, then we will contact you, we'll connect with you, find the best date, what are your desired dates and times for the workshop to occur. And then Naomi and I will, connect with each other, look at our unique schedules and our busy schedules, and work with your team to find a date and times that work best for for all of the parties involved.
Great. And Naomi, can you speak to if there are any requirements to purchase materials by taking this workshop?
There are not. Now, we love to offer suggestions for additional resources, continued learning if you're interested in that. So particularly when we're talking about some of the topics that I'll cover in those first 4 modules, if someone's like, gosh, I really want to learn more, I want to go even deeper with spiritual abuse, are there any books you would recommend? Happy to make recommendations, but there's nothing that you're going to have to purchase aside from the workshop itself.
Great. Melodie, you mentioned that this workshop is specifically designed for teams, but is there an ideal number of participants for this workshop?
We're looking at about 12 people. 12 people is what we've designed the workshop. It could be 6, it could be 8 people, but we've priced it for up to 12 people. And additional learners would be an additional cost on top of that, but you can have up to 12 people, and that's really a good number to have in the training session.
Great. Well, and Melodie, maybe you can speak to this one as well, and then Naomi, you can jump in. But if there's a church leader on here who's like, how do I secure buy-in from my leaders to host this at my church? What if my church doesn't think this is needed? What would you say to that?
I would say, I know what I recommend for all of our churches that are asking the very same question about buy-in, whether it's about safeguarding in general or safeguarding in relation to spiritual abuse. What makes the biggest difference with leaders is when you can tell lived experiences of individuals that have been abused and even spiritual abuse. So I would encourage you to put on your staff agendas or on your board meeting agenda abuse and use case study. And you can always reach out to us at beEmboldened or Plan to Protect more case studies than we wish we had in both of our organizations. But start of victim survivors of spiritual abuse. And sometimes just those lived experiences, those testimonials will help raise enough fear to think, hey, we really do need to address this. And helping leaders see that this is a risk that could really combat the good work that you do. One of the services we offer at Plan to Protect is investigations. And it actually breaks my heart to see the amount of money that churches and ministries have to lay out for investigations. When people donate to your ministries, when people donate to their churches, they are not so that they can pay for an investigation of spiritual abuse to take place. And it could shut down your doors. It could ruin your reputation, the good reputation that you've built within your organization. So beginning with those conversations, those real life examples and stories of abuse, talking about the risk of not doing something compared to the small investment in addressing it, and how that would save so much money down the line in protecting your reputation and protecting the good work that you do, and the investment, so you don't have to spend money either fighting a court case or even having to do an investigation into spiritual abuse. Prevention is always the best approach. Do you have anything to add to that?
I do. Oh, you got me fired up because you said that so well. And so, yeah, I want to add, I was recently at a conversation after doing some work with a congregation, and one of the leaders had said to me, which was just so well put, after this individual was like, I just was sitting there feeling convicted in this way or in that way, and kind of realizing, wow, I can do this better and I can do that better. And not that this person is abusive, but we can all continue to learn how to engage in a more Christ-like way, how to navigate these conversations, how to companion, how to prepare, and so I thought that was so powerful for someone who cares about the issue, who is already informed on the issue, but to go through a training and say, oh my goodness, wow, yeah, like I can see some other areas that I can grow in. So I don't think anyone's exempt from this workshop being helpful. And I don't think anyone's exempt from bringing it to their leaders' attention either. I love the people that we get to interact with, because I see such a mix of survivor advocates, survivor leaders who are coming forward and saying, hey, here's why it's important. I can use my story as the story, because they're in a place where that's something that is purposeful in their lives for them to do. And there are people who, they have never experienced spiritual abuse, thankfully. Maybe they know someone, maybe they don't. Maybe they've just seen the prevalence. They've heard the outcry from those who have suffered. And they're saying, no, like I want to advocate. I want to bring this to the attention of the church. And I want to spearhead this program within my congregation. And so we see such a mix of people who are bringing options like this, programs like this that are being created, and saying, hey, we really need this. Here's why. And we're seeing leaders respond. So if you're tuning into this now, or you catch it in the replay and you're like, well, I'm not a leader, that's okay. You are a leader, first of all, in some way, shape, or form. I promise you that. And so if this is a conversation you want to have, and I think Melodie was saying earlier too, that we have more case studies than we wish we had. So if you're thinking, gosh, I do want to go to leadership, I feel like I could use a little coaching maybe on exactly what to show them or something like that, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to get you some, equip you a bit. We do have a flyer you can share, of course, as well as sharing a case study or something like that. And happy to answer questions too after it's taken to leadership, or leaders, who step forward who are like, hey, I have some follow-up questions on this. Of course, happy to engage those.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive into some questions from our audience. We've got some great questions in here, so I'm going to try to get to all of them, but please keep adding questions if you like. This one I think relates to what we're just talking about, so I'd like to ask it first, even though it's a more recent one. How can we make sure our personnel and congregation members understand that spiritual abuse is something that they can bring to the attention of leadership to be addressed? Would you mind kicking us off with this one?
Read the question again. I don't want to miss any element of that, Natasha.
Sure, of course. And let me see if I can actually make this. Oh, no, I can't. How can we make sure our personnel and congregation members understand that spiritual abuse is something that they can bring to the attention of leadership to be addressed?
Well, I think that whole culture of goodness is so important. I think we should never be silencing people. I think when we rob people of agency and we rob people of being able to speak and raise concerns, that is the first, probably one of the first indicators of spiritual abuse. So if you don't feel safe raising a concern, be aware that that is one of the first indicators of spiritual abuse. We should be able to raise concerns. As an employer, when I interview and hire staff, I say, yes, I am your employer. I am the president of Plan to Protect, but we are also sisters and brothers. And if you see anything in my life that lacks integrity, please call me on it. I want to have that open door. I want to be able to hear people and have the posture of being willing to hear when there are concerns. I may not always like what I hear, but my response is really key. And I think that's why we need to teach people even how to have some of those tough questions and be listeners and be willing to take in difficult news. So I think if we role model being open ourselves to difficult things to say, but also using grace when we even raise concerns. I know that if people come and I feel attacked, then I'm going to go into a much more difficult.
Looks like we lost Melodie. Hopefully she can come back in just a bit. But until then, Naomi, would you like to try to answer or add to this question? Oh, and you are muted.
Sure. I'm going to take it from a little bit of a different angle because I want Melodie to be able to finish her train of thought when she comes back. So I'm going to take it from a bit of a different angle. I think when we have a congregation or personnel, whomever it may be, who is just not necessarily seeing why this is so important, like why do we need to be talking about this? Having some information about basically building our own confidence in the issue. So making sure that we have a good handle, because when we have a good handle, it's going to be easier then for us to express it to someone else. And so I would suggest getting that kind of good handle yourself, which I think you're doing by being here. You're learning more about it for yourself so then you can share it with others. And a couple of big points that I like to make are, one, we see so much in the New Testament about cautions against issues with leadership, whether it's a false teacher, a false prophet, or it's character concerns like we see in Timothy and in Titus, like, hey, here's what we need to be seeing for character. It's not being talked about so much. It did not make the cut in scripture, especially on repeat, because it's not prevalent. We're getting a big warning of, hey, church, this is going to be an issue. You're going to see this, and it's probably going to be rampant. And so make sure that you're on alert, because we're not only going to want to call it out and make sure we're preventing it, some people are going to get harmed. And we want to make sure that we're then loving them well, because again, the true fallout, and we see it over and over again at beEmboldened, I'm sure Plan to Protect has run into this too. The ultimate fallout is that people walk away from the faith because they don't actually know how, like, what was Jesus versus what was the people. That's really, really difficult to disentangle what's true, what's not true. And so maybe at best they step away from community, but biggest fallout is people can actually turn away from the faith. And that is a huge, I don't know what could be more concerning for the church than the church's behavior. And I'm not saying that all of us are doing this, but some people in the church using the church's name to cause harm and have people then walking away from the church. I don't know what is more just at the core of who we are as Christ followers in the church, is to make sure that we are stepping in and we are coming alongside. We are preventing and we are helping people as they heal and they rebuild. So I think emphasizing points like that of, you guys, we can talk about prevalence. We can talk about how scripture actually infers the prevalence. And we can also talk about, even if a leader's like, well, it doesn't happen that often. Well, Jesus went after the one, right? And if the one was injured by the church, we need to learn how to come alongside that person. So I would take it from both of those angles, and they're true. They're just honest, true answers. We're not having to stretch here.
Thanks so much, Naomi. Melodie, we lost you, but it's good to have you back. I don't know if you had any other thoughts to add to that, to answer this question.
It's what Naomi said was bang on. I do think we need to really address this. We need to check ourselves and how we respond and steward stories ourselves and be approachable and be willing to listen and believing the best in each other. But if we don't hear the best, or we don't find that people are responding appropriately to us, make sure that you document your concerns and bring it to the attention of the whole board. And you may need to step aside, as Naomi said, if you feel that people are not responding appropriately. But just your posture and their posture is so key in receiving these reports and raising concerns.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a great question we just received. Are there certain church governance structures that are more receptive to being equipped in this arena? Any patterns, maybe of patterns of spiritual abuse that happen in certain church governance structures?
Could say yes.
Yeah.
We work in churches, and I do see some churches that are doing well in this. Seeing this. So I don't know if Naomi has. I would like to be able to say yes, but I don't. I think we all have a long way to go in addressing this topic.
I would agree. Yeah, we do all. There are risks, and that's how we talk about it, I believe, in module 2. Okay, there are some areas maybe that would be at greater risk. Like, for example, if I was looking at church polity and I'm seeing, okay, we have there's some churches where there isn't really oversight, and it really is kind of like a one person operating the church, and there isn't really much going on. Maybe it's a smaller plant if they don't have people yet who can be an elder board. There's different conversations to be had there. So there are certain areas where I would say the risk is higher. And that's something that we equip people on from the survivor side and the prevention side for those who are walking into churches is, hey, here's some good questions to ask. Here's some things to consider. We love that we have the opportunity through this workshop to speak to the leaders about what we're equipping those who are coming in to be asking them and to be taking a look at. So it's like, hey, here's what we're saying is good for someone like myself walking into a church to have questions about and to be observing. Here's what people like me are asking questions about and are observing. So we like to be able to teach that from both sides. But yes, I would say that there are some that are more receptive. There are some who are just kind of struggling more with what exactly is this? And I think one note I'll say there before we move forward is the language is on the newer side. The issue is not. I did, for my seminary degree, I did an independent study with a professor because I wanted to take a look at how often spiritual abuse was in the Old Testament. And in order to not make it like a 30 credit course, because it could only be one or 2 credit course, I had to stick just with the major minor prophets and go through those. And I had pages and pages of examples of things that were being said by the prophets to the leaders of Israel, speaking to the spiritual abuse that was just so prevalent. It was pervasive. This is not an old issue or not a new issue. This is an incredibly tale as old as time kind of issue. And so I think it's the language that people can get hung up on because the language is on the newer side. But again, the issue has been around as long as we can possibly imagine. This has been going on. We can go back to the beginning of Israel. This has been going on. And so I think also keeping that in mind, I think even adding that to the previous question we had about how do we approach leadership about this, like this is not new, everyone. It's just the term is newer.
That's great. This is a great question related to just spiritual abuse in general, but really applies to the leadership setting. Can anyone spiritually abuse others, or can only spiritual leaders cause spiritual abuse?
Well, I think anyone can use scripture to manipulate others.
It looks like we may have lost Melodie again.
Often in my training, I say that if someone is abused with outside of the church, they question the existence of God. But if they are abused within the church, this then becomes their view of God. And I think anyone within a church setting could cause harm.
Thank you. Naomi, what about you?
Yes. And I think the impact is going to be exacerbated by someone that is being looked up to. So, and again, this happens. I mean, we're talking about equipping churches. I think even church leaders, for them to be aware, this happens in homes. This happens in households. And so this culture, even for a church, like, it's really going to matter, because it's going to carry over into people's households and what they're experiencing in their families. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be, in fact, oftentimes it's not like, oh, I have this specific title, like I'm an executive director, or I'm the volunteer coordinator, or I'm the youth leader, or the small group facilitator. Like, those titles do matter, and they do come into play. And absolutely, we could talk all day about the issues that come from positions like that, depending on the environment. But it's not necessarily. It can be, gosh, I really look up to this older woman in the church. I see her kind of as a bit of a mentor figure. Spiritual abuse can happen there too. So I think that perception is really key. Not necessarily someone who has like this set title that's going to give them that position.
Yeah, I think the definition of spiritual abuse is key. That word perception, of like what the perception of the authority is, that matters. It may not be official title. That's great. A question here from someone asking, what do you do when you realized you're the one being spiritually abused?
I apologize. I'm so much more visual sometimes. Would you repeat the question? Or are you
Yeah,
able to
I would say, I would answer that, call beEmboldened. That's how I would answer that question.
You said when you realize
you're
the
that
one.
many times.
Yeah. When you realize you're the one who's been spiritually abused?
Yes. And I'm trying to find the question here so I can add it here to the chat.
So yeah, I would want you to call us too, because I know that we know how to come alongside you. Also, look for someone who has expertise in spiritual abuse. It's just going to be different. I've had so many people come to our organization, and I've heard up to 5 previous professionals, actual professionals, that they have asked to support them. And they're like, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. And so it does help. The qualifiers that we have for someone to be on our team, to have direct contact with someone, is actually really hard to fill. That's why there's 3 of us currently, because people have to be trained they have to be trained as a support professional. They have to be trained in biblical and theological studies so that they can respond to what twists and issues there are, whether someone believes the Bible is God's word or not, because we're not only coming alongside people who are Christian at this time, but just being able to recognize, well, wait, that is not actually Christianity. This is where they went wrong. One of the ways they went wrong. They also have to have a personal lived experience, because when we've lived it ourselves, we're just going to hear it differently, and we can respond in a more nuanced way. So those are 3 criteria for someone to be on our team. When we serve internationally, so I mean, we'd be happy to come alongside, happy to have a conversation and get you connected with one of our programs. If you're like, I want to go a different route, I want someone local, I want to be able to sit down face to face, I want somebody to talk to, look for someone who has that area of expertise. Look for an initial conversation, kind of dip your toe in and get to know someone a little bit. Okay. Like, we don't have to jump in and tell someone everything. That can feel really unsafe. And it can actually be unsafe to do that. Even if we've come from an environment where that is what was required of us, it is good and it is well to say, hey, I'm going to give a little information. I'm going to see how they respond. And then maybe I'll give a little more and see how they respond. So being able to take your time with someone. Now, going to the church, a different church, could be really helpful. It can also feel really risky. And so someone outside of the church context, which we always tell churches, when they have someone who's coming, like, also refer out, like, get an outside expert as well. We'll talk about more of why we say that in the course, if someone would have questions about that, because we've got some reasons that we'd love to share and be able to engage on. But look for someone that is separate as well. Now, you may have someone who is in the church too that you trust. Wonderful. But again, if that's feeling really high risk, which it can, then look outside of.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for answering these questions. Thank you for asking questions. We are out of time for our Q&A portion. So if you didn't get your question answered and you would like to talk more about the question you asked, please reach out to us at hello@beEmboldened.com. I believe info@plantoprotect.com is another is Plan to Protect's email. So please reach out. We'd love to hear from you and would love to answer those questions. We did promise a special announcement, so I just want to share that we're really thrilled to announce that beEmboldened is opening registration on November 1st for its first ever in-person conference, Living Out Freedom, which is going to be hosted in the beautiful Tennessee mountains at Saverville Conference Center. Those dates are going to be September 11th through the 13th in 2025. So you've got a little under a year to plan and to get your tickets and be there in person. But this is going to be a really unforgettable and unique experience. This gathering is designed specifically for equipping survivors and those who care about spiritual abuse with practical knowledge from expert speakers. So if this topic interests you at all, if you think others you know might be wanting to attend, we'd love to see you there. So thank you all so much for coming today. We want to thank you for joining us and listening in by offering a discount code, 20% off of this one-day workshop, Spiritual Abuse 2024. I'm going to add that banner here so that you can see it and take advantage of this discount code. And we're going to give you a QR code that you can scan to register so that if you want to take advantage of this before the end of the month, we would love to see you register either in Canada or US. Please take the appropriate QR code there and use that discount code Spiritual Abuse 2024 for 20% off from now through October 31st.
And just a quick note.
Yeah.
Just a quick note on that for everyone. It would be purchasing. No worries about having completed it, even having it scheduled yet, just going on and purchasing it. We can then work through the scheduling and all of those good things. So if you're a church and you're like, gosh, we're heading into our marathon, of the holiday season of Advent, and it's going to be best for us to regroup come January, that's totally fine. It's not that you have to have completed the workshop by the 31st, just committing to the workshop by the 31st.
Oh, I've been muted this whole time.
I thought it was just me.
I did too.
I was like trying to figure out my audio. I'm like, what happened to my AirPods die? Because
so sorry.
Melodie, I was looking at you. You're like so sweetly nodding. So I'm sweetly nodding. I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
I thought I was once again having tech problems. And I apologize for the tech problems I've had.
Well, we've had a couple of tech issues this call, so thank you guys all for your patience and listening in with us. But just wanting to thank you so much for joining us today. I've added the links in the chat to register as well if you missed the QR code. And again, if you just register before the 31st, you'll get that 20% off discount code. Naomi and Melodie, any closing thoughts that you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
It's just a privilege to partner with you, Naomi and Natasha, and we look forward to doing these workshops and learning from both the churches and ministries that we are going to be training, but also continuing to learn from each other, because we have learned a lot from each other, and we both really value that.
Yes, I agree. It's a treat. It's a treat to get to partner with Melodie and with Plan to Protect, and just to have other organizations like Plan to Protect where it's like, yes, I know they're solid and I know I can refer there and I know that they're trusted. And just, I know that Melodie is truly a lovely person. And so, yeah, I'm thankful. I'm grateful. And it's always a privilege to come alongside all of you who are watching and who tune in. Thank you so much for caring about this issue. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for helping us to change this narrative, because we can't do it alone. And so we're grateful to be able to partner with all of you as well.
Wonderful. It is truly a wonderful partnership and collaboration to see these two organizations coming together. So it's a privilege to witness that. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.